Moving on down the console, guitars. Guitars are, I'll admit, they're a challenge, and when you get them right, there's no denying when it's right. But it's a challenge sometimes to get them right, and especially when you have two electric guitar players playing, and if they're playing very similar things, they can definitely get. They can really chew up your mix. Guitars have a tendency to be right in the vocal range as well. So with them being right in the vocal range, they can tend to hurt. They can, up in the upper mids. For me, one of the things that I always try to push in guitars, especially when they're playing the notes, is 1K. I don't try to push it too hard, but I'm really conscious of that area because I feel like that's where the note is for the guitar. When they play their notes, the mids are really the portion that sticks out. The distortion in the guitar tends to be in the top end, the 5K and above. So if somebody's just got a sound that's breaking up too much, that distortion, I'll pull some of that out. But you don't want to be careful because you don't want it to sound muddy, And again, those are all things to think about too. When all these instruments get together, when you hear them individually, they sound nice and warm and full. But when they get all together, it can really chew up your mix, and a lot of mids sum in the low mids. So I find myself across the board, when my PA is tuned right and everything, I find myself when I'm mixing things together, I'll pull a lot of the low mids out. 250, 300. Those can really chew up the audio spectrum and cover up a lot of the detail in the top end. And so I find myself, especially in electric guitars, I'll pull some of those low mids out typically, especially when we've got it mic'd with a 57 on a cabinet or something like that. I'll pull some of that out. I don't pull it out so much that it sounds thin, but if it sounded really thick by itself, I would tame that down. That's basically guitars for me. The other instrument in the guitars that's quite different is the acoustic guitar. And we tend to get a lot of guys that beat their acoustic guitar and not really play it. That seems to be the worship leader thing to do sometimes. But when they're beating it, I think of it more of as a percussive instrument. I usually pan it opposite of the hi-hat because they're usually doing the same kind of rhythms. And I think of it like another hi-hat. So I'll place it in the mix kind of like I place the hi-hat. And thinking about that kind of thing in relation to other instruments, I think is one of the key parts to making a good mix. I'll tend to compress it a little bit faster attack so that it doesn't sound so percussive if we're going for that. But if that's what they're playing, if that's how they're playing it, I'll tend to thin it out too. I don't want it to be so thick and thick and rich. Sometimes is not a good thing for an acoustic guitar with a band mix. But if there's a time in the morning or in the performance when the musician's playing and it's just acoustic, you might want to have that EQ ready to go to where you can, hey, he's just playing this solo and I need to make sure that it has enough body and warmth in it to where it sounds rich and not like some thin ukulele kind of thing sound. And all of those things in perspective. Digital consoles, you can change EQs on the fly and recall them back for certain scenes or songs, and it's kind of cool to have. But in the analog world, be ready to warm it back up if it's just going to be a solo instrument. Just all those things that you got to keep in mind when you're mixing all these instruments.